Я не готов поверить, что это мой народ. На их губах улыбки, в их головах дерьмо. Их каждый зуб осколок, и каждый глаз бельмо. Шизоиды кастраты, ублюдки трех полов. Я знаю, будет схватка, я к ней давно готов. Но молча улыбаясь, идут навстречу мне. Обходят, окружают, все как в кошмарном сне.
I couldn't do rap. I was trying. I don't know how. I'm not good enough to know. I'm not a Negro or something. I don't know what it is. I just can't do it.
I wonder if anyone out there recognizes this.
그리고 진짜 제가 해보고 싶은 게
Well, I know you do, and there is a very good reason for that, but I was referring to the folks at home. If anybody out there recognizes what was just playing there. That's going to be what the show's about next week, but that episode is going to be pretty long and involved and needs a bit more research. So this week I thought I'd do something a little bit easier. I've seen a couple people ask me, hey, what are some of your favorite black metal albums? So I'm like, shit, I can crank out 3 of those. So that's what we're going to do. This week it's going to be 3 great Norwegian black metal bands, or as Dark Throne called it on the back cover, Transylvanian Hunger, Norsk Arisk black metal, which translates to a Norwegian
redacted
black metal. Technically, this is going to be like 6 of my favorite black metal albums, because we're going to do 2 from each of these bands. The first one is Dødheimsgard, who are interesting because nowadays they're mostly known for kind of kickstarting the whole avant-garde black metal thing when they got picked up by Moonfog in the mid-90s and did albums like 666 International and whatnot. But the albums that I'm really into from these guys were from their earlier period when they were a much more traditional black metal sounding kind of band. In fact, they were so traditional, their first album, Chronicle.
Krone til konge.
Thanks, yeah, that. Anyways, that first album, Krone til konge, it's so traditional, it's got freaking Fenris from Dark Throne doing guest bass work on it. A lot of people don't know that that's actually the instrument he originally started out on when he began playing music in his youth. And it's always kind of stuck around. There's really good bass lines in like Isengard and whatnot. But this band is mainly, at this point, it's Vikotnik and Uldhran. Those 2 guys, they both do vocals, they both do multiple instruments, they both collaborate on writing the music. Uldhran is probably, he's up there. He's one of my favorite black metal vocalists. He's got, it's not a very flashy style. It's subtle, but it's pretty hateful sounding, and I dig it. Anyways, that first album, Fenris describes it as having a very unfriendly sounding production, and I would agree with that. It's very raw and harsh. Good instrumental separation, though. You can hear all the guitars and all the bass and the drums and the vocals and whatnot in isolation very well. But it's exceptionally raw and nasty sounding. And it features some very interesting breaks, like this one here. You've got to have a really loud bass drum for your slow parts if you're going to be a Norwegian black metal band. That's the rules. Going back to Under a Funeral Moon, if not earlier. But how they come out of this like slower dissonant part right here is pretty interesting, because they managed to shift it into something a bit more melodic even. Still unfriendly sounding, still hateful, but it's a bit more consonant than those very dissonant tritones they were hitting earlier. Possibly in deference to Black Sabbath, who brought the tritone into metal and kind of invented heavy metal, you know what I mean? By doing that kind of evil stuff. There's some more great bass playing. Speaking of great bass playing,
you shut your god-dang mouth, or I'll shove that ditch witch down your throat and dig a tunnel straight through to sunshine.
here's another more melodic song. In this one, there's some interesting melodic counterpoint going on between the bass and the guitars. That's kind of what really sticks out to me about this album, is that really nasty production, whole lot of atmosphere, and cool bass playing. Since I started out as a bassist, kind of like Fenris, I like it when bands have cool bass playing in them. Especially in a genre you wouldn't normally expect that to happen in, like black metal. Which is probably why this particular Dodheimsgard album has stuck with me for so long, despite being so raw and nasty and unfriendly sounding. Dodheimsgard, it's a whole bunch of words smashed together. It essentially translates to Realm of Death. So after that first Dodheimsgard album, Vikotnik and Uldhran did It is solid for Fenris since he guested on their album. They did guest vocals on the second Isengard album. Then we get to the second Dodheimsgard album called Monumental Possession, which does not feature Fenris, but it does feature Apollyon from Aura Noir, and you can tell because it's very thrashy, exceptionally thrash metal influenced, especially compared to the more melodic and melancholic strains of that first album. However, I like it just about as much. The thrash they're playing is very Germanic sounding, very much influenced by Destruction with the hammer-on pole dolls. Here's a cool little break. Gotta love this kind of stuff. It's also a little bit more conventionally produced, which helps with the more aggressive sound, I would say. These vocals are from Vicotner, not Ultra. Later on, you get into some more mid-paced stuff on the album. It's still thrashy, but it harkens back to the more downbeat, melancholic moments of their first album. Just done in a more thrashy manner. Vocals right here remind me a lot of Bathory's Call from the Grave, how he's doing these overlapping screams. The intro to that song, and the fact that it's all mid-paced and such. So these guys definitely had their heads in the 80s for this album, which I have no problem with because I love old Bathory and old Destruction. And that's like you slam these two together with Norwegian black metal, you get Dodheimsgard. But here they get into more melodic stuff still, just in this like new thrash metal context, which I think is a very interesting sound that probably deserves a bit more exploration by newer bands, given that Dodheimsgard unceremoniously abandoned it after this album and then went into the realms of trying to just be as weird as possible, and I'm not really a fan of those later ones as much. Up next we have Kampfar, also from Norway, because this is the Norwegian black metal spooktacular. Can I say spooktacular?
이번에 처음으로
Yeah, I know it's not Trucktober anymore, but
I reject your reality and I substitute my own.
it's still Halloween in my version of the canon. We have Kampfar, their first album, Mellum Skoglede Asser?
mellom skogkledde åser.
Yeah, what she said. It's a good album. It has a very interesting cover in that it's a black metal album with a daytime photo on it. Very nice, sparkling, like blues and whites. High contrast photo of the frozen tundras, and it fits the very sharp and cold sound of this album. Also has very good bass playing. I'm sensing a common thread here. This is a pretty standard kind of ambient version black metal thing, but watch what it turns into. Got that weird samba thing going on in the drums, and these building up hanging bar chords with keyboards, letting you know we're leading to something very unique sounding. If you're into bands like Windeer and maybe even Moonsorrow, you kind of owe it to yourself to listen to some Kampfar. This band was highly influential on all that stuff, and it actually influenced Leviathan from the US a lot too. If you listen to interviews with Rest, there's some good bass stuff. I like the different layers of guitar here. It's folky, but it's still pretty foreboding sounding, despite maybe being a bit brighter and slightly more cheerful than your standard black metal type stuff. Their second album, Fra
underverdenen.
Yeah, that. It continues that folkish kind of thing they were doing on the first album by incorporating non-metal instruments, non-electronic, more stuff than just electric guitars and drums and bass and whatnot. Such as the deep, sonorous tones of the lore, the ancient Germanic pagan horn, which is definitely a drone instrument, and they make it work in a melodic context by using it as a jumping off point for these guitar melodies that kind of unfold out of the tones of this horn. They're big fuckers. I remember the first time I listened to this, I hadn't gotten that much into the pagan stuff. I was only like 15, 16, and I thought it was like a didgeridoo or something. That's not what that is. friggin' lure, man. And it works really well, kind of being the guiding pulse of the music in parts such as this. Really good stuff. Dig those first two Kampfar albums. After that, they broke up. They came back in the early 2000s, and their new stuff's alright. I don't enjoy it as much as their old stuff. Fucking whatever. Next. Up next, we have 1349, which is probably the band that the most amount of people listening to this will be familiar with out of all three of the bands I've mentioned. Because when you hear 1349, what do you think of? Really fast drumming from Frost, who is mostly famous for being in Satyricon, but he's kind of like Hellhammer from Mayhem in that he's drummed on a whole bunch of shit. Probably most famously the second Gorgoroth album, but he's all over the place. And of course he does hit very, very hard with the drums. And so 1349 is kind of known as a very fast drum type band, maybe like a black metal Cryptopsy or something. But for me, the two 1349 albums that stick out from their discography are not notable only for their drums, but for the guitar playing. In this case, we were talking about, wait a second, this can't be right, Beyond the Apocalypse and Hellfire, the second and third albums, which those aren't gobbledygook Nordic titles at all. Maybe these guys are fucking sellouts. Shit. But these albums are notable for featuring the guitar playing of a man named Tjalve, who is from another very under-recognized black metal band named Pantheon 1, and then after leaving 1349 went on to play guitars in Den Sakeldot. But he has a very interesting style of guitar playing, as you shall now hear. Quite a bit of a speedy 80s black thrash in here. But coupled with those drums and the fact that they're just doing everything so fast and angrily, definitely marks it as kind of like turn of the millennium black metal. Also really like Robin's vocals on this, but here's where it gets fucking crazy. These like dissonant riffs right here. Black metal voivod type shit. And then watch how he hits the root note real hard with the bass. That's like some fucking Morbid Angel shit or something, but then you've got these fill-in notes between the high impact stuff. It's just this like super dissonant, whacked out black metal. 1349 is the year that the Black Plague came to Norway, and that's what the band are named after, and it fits their very diseased sounding atmosphere that they conjure. Beyond the Apocalypse, though not as famous and spectacular in its impact as Hellfire, is also a pretty good album, and it features an interesting variety of sonic techniques. Audible bass over a slow double bass beat? Well, slow for Frost anyways. This song's called Singer of Strange Songs, which is a great song title. And this one shows off a bit of a death metal influence, I would say. Again, there's some noticeable Morbid Angel type shit going on here. Morbid Angel, of course, was an influence on the early Norwegian stuff, particularly Altars of Madness. This actually reminds me of something off like Blessed of the Sick, but it's still got that same weird guitar playing from Tjalve. And I dig it as much as Hellfire. So those two 1349 albums, those are some of my favorite black metal albums. Those two Kampfar albums, those are up there. And those two Dødheimsgard albums. Good stuff. Even if you sound like a dork because you got to do that O with the slash through it. Dødheimsgard, if you're talking about them. But I think that about covers it. You wanted to hear some good black metal albums. Hopefully I fucking dished that out to you. Check back next week. We are going to go pretty in-depth on an often neglected subject in metal history. Until then, I'll see ya.
So it's between the Democrats and the Republicans. Because the way I see it, politicians are just assholes who are full of shit. So you might as well call it like you see it. Democrats and Republicans.